Well, hello, and welcome to the Welcome Home podcast from Minnesota Home Ownership Center. My name is Bill Gray, and today we are going to take a look at non-interest-bearing financing in the home purchase arena. Joining me are Johanna Osman, Executive Director of Sakan Community Resource. Welcome, Johanna.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. And Beth Hyser, Chief Program Officer with NeighborWorks Home Partners, which is one of the homeownership advisor agencies in our network. Welcome, Beth.
Well, thank you.
Thanks to both of you for coming on the show. This is going to be a really interesting conversation, I think. Let's start with you, Johanna. Before we get into the weeds on this non-interest financing, tell us a little bit about Sakan Community Resource and what you do for our collective community out there.
It's really exciting what we do. I'm very proud of what we do. So Sakan Community Resource is mostly an educational organization. Our mission is that anybody in Minnesota has access, has the connections, the resources to own their own home within their faith guidelines.
Okay.
So what we are focusing on and the roadblock that has been in front of a good chunk of our community is those people who don't want to use interest to finance their homes or to finance anything. We have a group of Muslims in general, and more specifically East African immigrants who will not buy their home.
And that's a religious mandate or restriction, is that right?
Yes, in the Islamic religion, the big no-no is to make your money, make your living by earning interest. And because, if you have to pay somebody that interest to get whatever you need, the idea is I'm perpetuating that system. So it is less of a problem to buy your own home with an interest-bearing mortgage, but most of the community that I serve, they will not even get close.
Right, because they don't want to pay the interest. Well, that makes sense. Does Sakan, do you only deal with home ownership issues, or do you do other things as well?
Well, we started out really. The word Sakan is kind of it has many meanings, but those three sounds, the sin, the ka, and the nun, they can mean tranquility, they can mean stability, and it can also mean home.
Okay.
So it's just a wonderful word that means that feeling of stability when you have your own home.
Right.
So our focus originally was on home ownership. And in order to get there, we set out we partnered with other nonprofits to just like basic financial literacy. How do you get there?
Right.
How do you have a relationship with banks? How do you save? What are all of the ideas about taxes, and how do I prepare for those things?
How does money work in the U.S.?
How does money work, exactly?
Right.
And the community that we serve is mostly resettled refugees that had never had to think about these kinds of things.
Right.
And as soon as they got to the United States, they just had to hit the ground running and start a job and, pay rent and that kind of thing. And that community is the system that they got into. It's really hard to get out of.
Yeah.
Once you're in an apartment that's affordable.
Right.
And then you've had 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. There's no apartment beyond that is affordable.
Right.
And so most of the community that we have been interacting with had been in Section 8 housing for 20 years.
Yeah.
And the only alternative they had was to own a home.
Yeah.
And the few people that were trying to buy homes that would fit their big families, they could never qualify for a mortgage.
Right.
They hadn't been using credit cards, and so they didn't have a credit history.
Right.
And they, oftentimes they've got a paycheck and they've got 2 or 3 other side hustles,
Mm-hmm.
and they haven't been paying their taxes correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so on paper, they don't look like they could afford that.
Right.
But they know they could afford it.
Right.
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 So our community, there were, when we first started in 2016, there was one fairly well-known zero interest mortgage company.
Okay.
And that company, made a comfortable living, but they were catering to a wealthier crowd,
Mm-hmm.
people that could qualify for their mortgage.
Right.
And the community that we're serving and helping to get there, they could not get qualified through that. And so that opened up the door to some of these predatory lenders that you can't get, we'll buy the house for you and we'll sell it to you.
The whole contract for deed
Right,
thing.
the
I
contract
do
for
want to
deed.
talk about that, but let's do a little level setting. And thank you for the overview of Sakan. I know we work with you a lot, and you're a really important organization out there. So non-interest-bearing financing in the home purchase arena, this concept of a no-interest mortgage might be confusing to a lot of our listeners. Hopefully less and less confusing. But I know the first time I heard it, I was like, okay, that sounds like a great deal. But it's not what it sounds like. So what I wrote down was, let's see. I tried to explain it as not, and you tell me if I'm on par here, and Beth, you can as well. Non-interest-bearing financing is simply an alternative financial tool that structures the home purchase transaction in a way that avoids the payment of interest, that's what the important thing is to those adhering to the Muslim faith. But the total transactional costs associated with using the tool are probably similar. And I mean, they are similar. We have a guide on this, and we've laid it out, and we compare the two side by side. So it's not what it might seem based solely on the name. Beth, maybe we can look to you to tell us a little bit how this tool is used in the home purchase transaction, because I know you kind of have been doing a lot of this over at NeighborWorks.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Really, it can be called asset-based financing, zero interest. There's a number of kind of general descriptors. But again, as you mentioned, it focuses on the premise that riba, or interest, is profit at another's expense, or you're making money on money instead of making money on an asset. And that's one of the core tenets that it really conflicts with the traditional mortgage product.
Mm-hmm.
So it uses a profit rate, because it is a business transaction and a contract, versus an interest rate. The profit rate is documented on a financing contract, just like a typical industry kind of interest rate would look. There are really 3 basic models. One is the cost plus, or murabaha, and that financing, the customer buys the home and sells it to the home buyer. It looks the most similar to a traditional financing contract, and the profit is added to that. Instead of interest, it's profit. Then there's more of an equity partnership, which is musharaka, and that's shared ownership. So you're paying back the original contract with a profit to the financing company. The monthly payment increases the amount of home owned by the buyer. So if the buyer puts 10% down, they own 10% of the home. 90% would be remaining, and you're paying back a little bit of that every month. Again, conceptually not that dissimilar to what we do with traditional mortgages. And then there's a trust model, which is called a jara. And the trust purchases the home on behalf of the home buyer. So that's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
The financing company and the home buyer are both members of the trust. The home buyer is paying a payment monthly into the trust and acquires the full title when those lease payments equal the original cost of the contract. So that's kind of a broad, I would say, overview. The cost plus, or the equity partnership, those are the 2 more common models in Minnesota. We do have companies that operate all 3 in Minnesota, but the first 2 are more common. Really given the religious constraints on paying interest, it's really not surprising. Minnesota Compass from the Wilder Foundation notes that 89% of the Somali community in particular are renter households.
Mm.
And this kind of not understanding financing options is part of that barrier. So as Sakan gets out and talks about it, and other counseling agencies in the network, this is really an important message to get out, that there are tools. The zero interest or asset-based financing really can be an acceptable option to achieve home ownership, or others not wanting. You don't have to be Muslim to use this product. Anyone
Anybody
in the
can use it,
in the
yep.
community can use it. In all of the models, you do have to still be pre-approved for financing. They're looking at credit and having
They are
some
looking
savings.
at credit. Okay.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so that's again where financial coaching and that home education is really critical to understand what they're looking for. And you're going to be comparing these different models, or even different companies offering the same model, just like you would shopping
Right.
between other kinds of lending institutions, and really looking for the one that fits your situation the best. And you would identify the property, you enter in a purchase agreement depending on the model, that varies a little bit. But all costs and profit are disclosed in the standard financing documents, so none of it's a surprise or secret. This is regulated by the federal government, just like any other
Right.
financing. And that each financing product may have a different amount of like down payment requirements, and profit or like mortgage insurance requirements. And so again, that's where consulting with a home ownership or advisor or a coach with someone like Sakan can make a huge difference in
Yeah.
helping you to understand. In the end, the monthly payment may actually be lower, but there
Uh-huh.
might be a little higher down payment.
Yeah.
But just really looking at the whole situation versus saying, oh, it's more expensive.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's really not. But
Right.
you do need to look at each individual situation.
Okay. Okay. So I should mention that and I think I did, that the Homeownership Center has this guide to non-interest bearing financing in Minnesota, and in that guide, we have all of the providers currently offering this financing tool. So if people are interested in accessing that guide, you can do it online. All you have to do is go to hocmn.org. It's our website /non-interest. So hocmn.org/non-interest. And that'll take you right to the page. So I have a few questions about this, maybe for you, Johanna. First of all, can anybody invent one of these tools, or do they have to be approved by someone? I know the answer to this, and you can tell us about that. And then what was my other question? It's escaping me now. So how does one determine that one of these products is actually legit from a religious standpoint?
Right. We have in the United States, or in North America, we have an Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, AMJA, and they are scholars in every part of life. And then among us here in the Twin Cities, we have three of the main scholars that are focusing on financing.
Mm-hmm.
So we have really the freedom to talk to anyone, but that group and the folks are always reviewing every company as they come out, as they make some changes, and you were talking about changes, and then they give a fatwa. They give a juristic ruling on whether this is, halal. If it's not, they'll say why it's not, and give the company a chance to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things which sounds like, very small, but one of the things that one of the main companies was having trouble with is that the scholars did not like that they charged a late fee. because the original contract said, this is what we're, this is the money, this is how much the house costs, and this is what you're going to pay. And the late fees weren't part of that agreement. So the late fee was like considered riba, or considered interest. So they came because of discussion back and forth, you want to encourage families to pay on time, but not make it so difficult to pay, that kind of thing. So the agreement between the scholars and the company was they could take, I think $50 was the max they could take for a late fee, and then the company had to give that to charity. Isn't that cute?
Yep,
I love that.
That's cool.
So they couldn't earn from that family's hardship.
And that made sense to both parties.
Yeah,
so that
I really like that.
Talks about how this works. I remembered what else I wanted to talk about when it comes to these tools and the fact that you still have to qualify credit wise. And we've talked about this on the show here before, a lot of new arrivals to this country don't have a credit record. It's a fact. The way that the credit system in this country works is if you're responsible and you want to only use cash and do that kind of thing, you're not going to ever qualify for a mortgage because you don't have a credit record. So, so this is a question I asked you before we started. How does someone establish a credit record if they don't want to pay interest? That seems counterintuitive, but it's not, right?
So we teach a basic financial literacy class, and up front, in the beginning, we're saying you must have a credit score to do anything in this country. You can't rent an apartment without a decent credit score.
Right.
If you don't have a decent credit score, you're going to pay a huge security deposit. So now everybody realizes that, but they didn't know how you can overcome that. So in our financial education class, we show, and you showed it in the homestretch class. Nick the other day was talking about this, the 5 behaviors that affect your credit score. And the number one behavior is pay your credit cards on time and pay often.
Yep.
So we show people how, you were going to pay cash for that thing. Use your credit card, not your debit card. Pay for your gas, and then go home, go online, and pay that thing off. Yeah. As soon as if you feel unhappy about that and feel like, I'm doing something wrong, and that'll just make that's 35% of your credit score. Yeah. And that goes up like crazy.
That's great.
Really, and it's wonderful.
That's great. Because that's what I had forgotten. Of course, if you pay your credit card off every month, you're not paying any interest. Yeah, that's the point. Exactly. So anyways, I just think this stuff is also interrelated and complex. But anyways, okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys on the show to talk about this now is the fact that contract for deed is often portrayed as a way to avoid paying interest. The problem with this is the contract for deed doesn't have any of the protections for the buyer in the event that they run into temporary financial difficulties, miss a payment, that kind of stuff. Generally, missing a single payment or even a portion of a single payment can result in immediate eviction and forfeiture of your down payment and everything else. And the financial loss can be huge. Add to this situation the rise of predatory contract for deed arrangements, and you see why it's so important to get the word out about this non-interest-bearing alternative. Johanna, what have you seen in the community around the use of contract for deed as a way to avoid paying interest?
It became very big. I'll tell you why. Our organization started in 2016. In 2017, we asked African Development Center to come to our local mosque and teach the homestretch class on the weekends in their language and over a longer span of time. So a lot of people got qualified to buy homes. And then every cousin and brother and sister wanted to buy a home too and didn't know the process of buying. So they didn't know that they had to change the way they were dealing with cash, or had to get a credit score, or all of those things. And many people who knew they had a lot of money, but it's all in cash, got they saw this wave of people qualifying with the zero interest mortgage companies, because, as I said, it started out as one, but as soon as our doors opened up, we encouraged another one to open up, and the numbers, the hundreds of people that were buying houses, encouraged the one from Chicago to come up and make an office. So hundreds and literally thousands of people now have bought their houses with the zero interest mortgages. But the folks who had not been changing their methods didn't understand how.
Yeah.
So they got turned down. They didn't get approved for a mortgage, and they knew that they deserved to have that house, because I know I've got a lot of money, and my cousin just bought that expensive house. So the predatory contract for deed guys were just like circling, waiting for this. And one or two or three up in St. Cloud started making a big movement with about 15 or 25 families buying their homes that way, but not succeeding.
Right.
I mean, just like getting their huge down payment in there and then not being able to
losing
continue.
it all.
Yeah. And then down in Dakota County, we had another wave of predators that just zoomed in. And some of these people were the same, predators that were working in the equity stripping back in the 2007 and 8 and 9.
Yep.
So it was like, it's a good business model. It works.
I was gonna say it's a business model.
Yeah, and so that community, when they saw their cousins, failing and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars,
big money.
We stopped, but there was no alternative.
Right.
And then Sakan Journal and ProPublica wrote a wonderful article on that.
Yep.
And that was around the time that they taught me how to look up those contracts. So we sent about 40 contracts from Dakota County and Stearns County to the Attorney General's office. And that just, opened up the floodgates. And many from the Hispanic community were also being targeted.
Right.
So
again, because they don't have the credit, but here's a way to do it.
Exactly. And the so that triggered the legal aid to start a working group to modify the regulations around contract for deed that are specifically for the investor sellers, the guys that do this for a living, and those buyers that are going to be living in the house.
Right.
The regulations are completely different,
Right.
and there's a lot of protections now.
Good.
And we just passed it.
Good. Yes, and we were actually, the center was working too on some of that stuff. So it was good to see that. So I want to make 2 points. Not the non-interest financing tools are still a better option than contract for deed,
Yeah, they
even
have
though
all the
contract for deed is a little better now than it was last year.
Yeah.
Secondly, though, I don't want to give the impression that there's not a place for contract for deed in the marketplace. There is, but like you said, some of these reforms are going to help consumers understand better what they're getting into, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot happening here, and our purpose with this episode is to get the word out about these non-interest financing products as an alternative to contract for deed. Beth, I know that NeighborWorks itself is getting ready to offer its own non-interest bearing financing tool. Are you ready to tell us more about that, or is it still too much in development, or what can you say?
We can do a sneak peek.
All
How
right.
about that? So, actually, our two organizations partnered in 2018 to offer a down payment assistance product with some Minnesota Housing Finance and then some individually privately raised capital. And that was very successful. We learned a lot from that
Yes.
pilot,
Yes,
a
we
lot.
did.
And from that, we've been looking for resources, and through connections and opportunities last year with a really large housing bill at the state legislature, there was a particular $10 million investment made by the legislature specifically in down payment that would pair with a zero interest first mortgage.
Interesting. So this was a 2023 session? Okay.
2023 session.
Where all
yep.
that down payment stuff came out. Okay.
It did. So we're a little slow in rolling it out. We're working with the state. They had a $1 billion housing investment, so there was a lot more paperwork to do
lot of
in
work.
there on it as well. But so this would specifically be only for customers using the zero interest first financing product. So if you're using a traditional, there would be other down payment available. This is really a particular carve out. The terms of our down payment will be forgivable, and it'll be zero interest, no payments. So that's also critical to pair with a zero interest first financing product. And it's we'll have first time buyer focus. So that means you haven't owned a home before, different than first generation, which
Yep.
means your parents didn't own a home. This is just you personally have not owned a home before.
So this is a down payment product, not a non-interest financing product. I might
Not a
have
first
misunderstood
mortgage
that. Yeah.
product. Nope.
Okay.
That financing.
But it
we-
specifically can pair with these non-interest.
It has to
things.
pair.
Yep.
Yep. And
That's
that
the
was
point.
actually
Yep.
codified in the legislation.
Okay.
So we actually have been meeting with a number of the different groups, three in particular, and then there's a new one in our market that's out of Texas. So we're very excited, and they're excited. So the folks we would be serving are first time buyers at or below 130% of area median income, which is a little more than 150,000 a year for a family of four. Again, matching with that first zero interest first financing product, can buy a condo, a townhome, or a single family home. So a variety of different configurations based on your family. The household would contribute $1,000 towards the purchase. They would own or occupy the home as a primary residence. And that again, it's a forgivable down payment of up to 30% of the purchase price. And it will likely be kind of a capped amount too.
Yeah.
But it's significant.
And down payment
30%
assistance.
is amazing.
That is the tool to get over the hurdle of qualifying, for a mortgage, no matter if it's a non-interest
Correct.
or a traditional or whatever. So many people out there are paying full freight rent, and if they could get into a house and into a mortgage, they might have a lower payment, but they can't get over the hurdle of the down payment to get into that in the first place. That's why there's so much talk around down payment assistance these days. So that's great, and I understand it better now, and we will look for that when it comes out. Perfect. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. I think that'll do it for today's discussion. I want to thank you guys, Beth and Johanna. Thanks for coming on today. In closing, I want to acknowledge our sponsors, Associated Bank, Bell Bank, Bremer Bank, Huntington Bank, Midwest One Bank, and Old National Bank. Our sincere thanks to each of these organizations for their support. Thanks for watching and listening.